While everyone debates whether Harley-Davidson can survive today's market, what if I told you there is a woman who destroyed their future forever? A figure who systematically erased everything that made Harley legendary, alongside 4 other evil traitors. Today we'll be revealing the names of these inside snitches, including the woman who delivered the final blow that will take down Harley forever. Now let me start with a woman who took Harley's authentic motorcycle culture and transformed it into a disappointing luxury line that nobody asked for. Heather Malanchek came to Harley from General Mills, where she had spent years marketing breakfast cereals and snack foods to suburban families. Her background in consumer packaged goods should have been another warning sign. Motorcycle culture isn't something you can focus group and A/B test like yogurt flavors. But Malanchek arrived with supreme confidence in her ability to modernize Harley's brand messaging and expand our demographic reach. What she actually did was launch a systematic campaign to erase everything that made Harley advertising authentic and powerful. The More Roads to Harley campaign she spearheaded wasn't just bad marketing. It was cultural appropriation in reverse. Instead of celebrating the riders who made Harley legendary, the campaigns featured young, attractive models posing with motorcycles in urban settings that looked more like fashion shoots than motorcycle advertisements. The bikes became props in lifestyle fantasies that had nothing to do with the actual experience of riding. Where were the open roads? Where was the freedom? Where was the authentic connection between rider and machine that made Harley special? All of it was replaced with Instagram-ready imagery designed to appeal to demographics that didn't actually buy motorcycles. But the most damaging aspect of Malanchek's tenure wasn't what her campaigns included. It was what they deliberately excluded. Veteran riders, blue-collar workers, and the traditional Harley community were nowhere to be found. The message was unmistakable. Harley was moving on, with or without the people who built it. When the backlash began, Malanchek's response revealed her true contempt for Harley's customer base. In internal emails later obtained through a wrongful termination lawsuit, she referred to traditional Harley riders as aging demographics with declining purchasing power and dismissed their criticism as resistance to necessary evolution. The most shocking revelation came from a former marketing director who worked under Malanchek. According to his testimony, she had explicitly instructed her team to avoid featuring typical biker imagery in campaigns because it was off-brand for our target demographic. She was literally telling her marketing team not to show Harley riders in Harley advertisements. The financial impact was immediate and devastating. Brand tracking studies showed that Harley's authenticity scores, a key metric for motorcycle brands, plummeted during Malanchek's tenure. Worse, the campaigns failed to attract the young urban riders they were supposedly targeting, while actively alienating the core customer base. One particularly tone-deaf campaign featured a young woman riding a Harley through downtown Chicago while wearing designer clothes and carrying a purse that cost more than most riders' monthly motorcycle payments. The tagline was, "Find your freedom." The riding community's response was swift and brutal. Freedom from what? Reality? Malanchek's marketing wasn't just ineffective, it was insulting. She treated Harley's heritage like an embarrassment to be overcome, rather than a strength to be celebrated. And when the community pushed back, she doubled down, convinced that the problem wasn't her messaging, but her audience's inability to embrace progress. But she wasn't the woman that really destroyed Harley-Davidson just yet. You won't believe what the other people on this list did to the company. We have to talk about a German CEO who declared war on American tradition. What this person did to Harley will never be forgiven. Born in Mannheim, Germany, Jochen Zeitz made his reputation turning around Puma's struggling sportswear business in the 1990s. But athletic shoes and American motorcycles are two completely different worlds, a fact that Zeitz either didn't understand or simply didn't care about. When Harley's board brought him in as CEO in 2020, they thought they were getting a turnaround specialist. What they actually got was a corporate ideologue who viewed Harley's traditional culture as a problem to be solved, rather than an asset to be preserved. Zeitz's background was telling. He had spent years in luxury goods and European corporate environments where sustainability reports mattered more than customer passion. He arrived at Harley with a predetermined agenda to transform the company into what he called a purpose-driven organization focused on environmental and social responsibility. The disaster began immediately. Zeitz pushed a heavy ESG strategy that prioritized electric bikes like the Livewire over the rumbling V-twins that built the brand. He hired consultants from McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group, firms that specialized in corporate restructuring but had zero understanding of motorcycle culture. His public statements revealed the depth of his disconnect. In investor calls, Zeitz spoke about reimagining the brand for the 21st century and evolving beyond traditional demographics. But what he was really saying was that Harley's existing customers, the veterans, blue-collar workers, and multi-generational riders, were obstacles to his vision of progress. Under his leadership, Harley's stock continued its death spiral while loyal customers felt increasingly betrayed. Zeitz treated the company like a European luxury brand that happened to make motorcycles, completely missing the working-class authenticity that made Harley special. He turned board meetings into sustainability seminars while competitors like Indian were eating Harley's lunch with better bikes at lower prices. The final insult? Zeitz's compensation package included performance bonuses tied to ESG metrics rather than customer satisfaction or sales growth. He was literally being paid to prioritize corporate virtue, signaling over the riders who made Harley legendary. But surprisingly, Zeitz had a qualified background compared to the next person on our list, an individual who has no relations with the bike community whatsoever, but he was still granted a high place within the company. Larry Hund's resume should have been a red flag from day one. 25 years at Tiffany & Co., where he specialized in luxury customer experiences and premium brand positioning. The man who was hired to run Harley's commercial operations had spent his entire career selling engagement rings to wealthy couples in Manhattan boutiques. Hund arrived at Harley in 2019 with a mission to elevate the brand experience and attract affluent customers. But Harley wasn't Tiffany. It wasn't about white glove service and champagne in crystal flutes. It was about getting your hands dirty, the smell of motor oil, and the satisfaction of a well-tuned V-twin. The transformation he orchestrated was cultural vandalism. Hund systematically dismantled the dealership network that had been Harley's greatest strength for decades. These weren't just retail locations. They were community centers where riders gathered, shared stories, and formed lifelong friendships. Under Hund's direction, dealerships were redesigned to look like luxury showrooms. The grease-stained floors were polished to a mirror shine. The coffee was replaced with artisanal beverages. The comfortable chairs where old-timers told stories were removed to make room for sleek display cases. The atmosphere that made riders feel at home was sanitized into something unrecognizable. But the real destruction happened when Hund slashed dealer incentives and began systematically pushing out family-owned dealerships that had been selling Harleys for generations. His internal memos, later leaked to industry publications, revealed his true intentions. We need to transition away from legacy dealers who don't align with our premium positioning. Legacy dealers. He was talking about the men and women who had built Harley's distribution network, who knew 3 generations of the same families, who stayed late to help a rider fix a problem. To Hund, they were obstacles to his luxury vision. The human cost was devastating. Dealerships that had been in families for decades were forced to close or sell to corporate chains. The institutional knowledge, the personal relationships, the deep understanding of local riding communities, all of it was sacrificed for Hund's boutique fantasy. One particularly heartbreaking case involved a dealership in Ohio that had been family-owned since 1952. The owner, a Korean War veteran, had sold Harleys to 3 generations of local families. When Hund's new requirements made it impossible for him to maintain his franchise, he was forced to close. The last thing he said to a local newspaper was, "I don't recognize the company I spent my life supporting." Hund's luxury approach missed the fundamental truth about Harley ownership. It was never about exclusivity through price. It was about inclusivity through passion. When you turned dealerships into boutiques, You didn't elevate the brand. You destroyed the community that made it special. But depressingly, he wasn't the only person who turned Harley's identity into something it wasn't. There's another executive whose decision was so catastrophically tone-deaf that it left the entire motorcycle community in complete shock. Ryan Moresy's title alone should have been a warning: Chief Electric Officer. In 2020, Harley created this position specifically for him, signaling that electric motorcycles weren't just a side project. They were the future of the company. The problem was that Moresy seemed to believe the future required abandoning everything that made Harley special in the present. Moresy came from Tesla, where he had worked on electric vehicle charging infrastructure. His background in clean technology made him a darling of the sustainability crowd, but it also made him fundamentally incompatible with motorcycle culture. He arrived at Harley with the evangelical fervor of someone who believed internal combustion engines were relics of a primitive past. The Livewire project became his obsession. While Harley's traditional lineup suffered from underinvestment and declining quality, Moresy poured resources into developing electric motorcycles that solved problems Harley riders didn't have. The Livewire wasn't just expensive, it was philosophically wrong for the brand. Harley riders didn't just want transportation, they wanted the sensory experience of riding. The rumble of the engine, the smell of exhaust, the mechanical connection between rider and machine. These weren't bugs to be fixed, they were features that defined the entire experience. Livewire offered none of that. It was quiet, clean, and completely soulless. But Moresy's true crime wasn't just creating a bad product, it was the opportunity cost of his obsession. While he spent millions developing electric motorcycles that nobody wanted, competitors like Indian were improving their traditional engines, adding better technology, and offering superior value. Harley's core lineup stagnated while Moresy chased his electric dreams. The most damaging moment came during a 2022 product launch event, where Moresy actually criticized traditional motorcycles as outdated technology that was holding back the industry. He was standing in front of an audience of Harley dealers and riders, telling them that the products they loved were obsolete. Internal documents later revealed the extent of Moresy's influence on company priorities. Between 2020 and 2023, Harley spent over $400 million on electric vehicle development while cutting R&D budgets for traditional motorcycles by 30%. Models like the Road King and Fat Boy, bikes that had been customer favorites for decades, received minimal updates while the Livewire got constant attention. The market response was predictable and brutal. The Livewire flopped spectacularly, selling fewer than 1,000 units in its first year, despite massive marketing investment. Meanwhile, Indian's traditional Challenger was outselling comparable Harley models by significant margins, proving that riders wanted better conventional motorcycles, not electric alternatives. Moresy's electric evangelism represented everything wrong with Harley's leadership during this period. Solutions in search of problems, innovation divorced from customer needs, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what made the brand valuable. He treated Harley like a tech startup instead of a motorcycle company, and the results were catastrophic. But if you think those executives were destructive, we are now going to introduce you to the woman who didn't just damage Harley. She systematically executed its soul with surgical precision. This is the corporate assassin who became the final nail in Harley's coffin, and her calculated destruction will leave you absolutely speechless. Corin's background was in progressive activism and corporate consulting. Her LinkedIn profile described her as a change agent and culture warrior, terms that should have terrified anyone who understood what Harley represented. She didn't just want to change Harley's marketing. She wanted to fundamentally transform what the brand represented. In her mind, Harley's traditional identity wasn't something to be preserved or evolved. It was something to be erased and replaced. She introduced sweeping internal DEI mandates that restructured employee culture around what she called progressive ideals. But these weren't just HR policies. They were ideological litmus tests that determined who belonged in the new Harley-Davidson and who didn't. Longtime employees who had dedicated their careers to the brand suddenly found themselves attending mandatory training sessions that seemed designed to make them feel ashamed of the very culture they had helped build. The changes went deeper than most people realized. Corin pushed ad campaigns featuring lifestyle influencers instead of actual bikers, campaigns that were immediately mocked online by the very community Harley was supposed to serve. But when the mockery started, instead of reconsidering the approach, she doubled down. The problem, in her view, wasn't the campaigns. It was the community's resistance to progress. But the real destruction happened at the dealer level. Corin allegedly clashed with dealership heads who resisted these changes, and the consequences were swift and brutal. Many were terminated or phased out. The same dealers who had been selling Harleys for generations, who understood the culture, who had relationships with riders that went back decades. These weren't just business decisions, they were purges. Corin seemed determined to remove anyone who represented the old Harley-Davidson to make room for her vision of what the brand should become. The institutional knowledge, the cultural understanding, the deep connections with the riding community, all of it was sacrificed on the altar of modernization. When longtime customers raised concerns about these changes, Corin's response was telling. She publicly dismissed them as suffering from nostalgia bias. Think about that for a moment. The customers who had supported the brand for decades, who had bought multiple bikes, who had brought their friends and family into the Harley community, their concerns were dismissed as psychological defects. The final nail in the coffin came with her most devastating decision. Corin spearheaded the choice to scrap 2 heritage models, bikes that represented decades of Harley tradition and engineering evolution, in favor of what she called gender-inclusive city cruisers. These weren't just product decisions. They were symbolic executions of everything Harley had represented. The heritage models weren't just motorcycles. They were rolling pieces of American history. They represented the evolution of the brand, the refinement of engineering, and the continuation of traditions that connected modern riders to the pioneers who built the company. The gender-inclusive city cruisers that replaced them were everything the heritage models weren't. Focus-grouped, committee-designed, and completely soulless. They looked like motorcycles, but they felt like appliances. They had all the emotional resonance of a toaster and about as much connection to Harley's legacy. The most heartbreaking part wasn't just the anger. It was the sadness. Riders who had planned to pass their love of Harley to their children suddenly questioned whether there would be anything left to pass down. Veterans who saw their Harleys as symbols of American values felt betrayed by a company that seemed ashamed of those same values. Corin had achieved something that decades of foreign competition, economic downturns, and market changes couldn't accomplish. She had broken the emotional bond between Harley-Davidson and its community. The brand that had survived the Great Depression, World War II, and countless business challenges was brought to its knees by an executive who seemed to actively despise everything it represented. What do you think? Can Harley recover, or is it too late? Has the damage been too severe, the trust too broken, the community too betrayed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that matter to riders. The crown may have slipped, but the story isn't over yet. Want to watch more types of these videos? Click on your screen now.